Thanks for tuning in once again. As in this episode, Chapter 21, Part 2, we'll take a look at America's imperialism through the Spanish American War. In our last episode, we looked at reasons for America looking to expand its kind of influence around the world, as well as taking a look at how we had purchased Alaska and kind of taken Hawaii. But what we'll be taking a look at here is once America enters the splendid little war, as it was called, the Spanish-American War, we kind of leave at the end kind of becoming a little bit more of a world power and claiming new areas around the world. Kind of this expansionist feeling really was taking hold within the United States. You see, America's involvement in the Spanish-American War kind of stems from the Spanish misrule of Cuba. Less than 100 miles off the Florida coast, Americans were kind of reminded of their own fight for independence against Great Britain, the more they became aware of the Cubans in their struggle to try to break away from the Spanish. And as these Cubans struggled against the Spanish, General Weyler from Spain implemented his reconcentration policy. Now, what this did was concentrate masses of Cuban civilians in remote areas of Cuba, where over 100,000 died in just a 3 years' time. And General Weyler was being portrayed as a butcher, as stories were being made up that he was, feeding, Cuban babies to sharks, poisoning the drinking wells of the Cubans. But even though some of these stories weren't true, it's what the yellow press or yellow journalists wrote about. You see, the papers of Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst were kind of at war with each other, trying to outsell each other. And so they were trying to publish all these articles about the Spanish atrocities that the Cubans were facing. And this sensationalized and fabricated stories were starting to flow out to the American public, and it really generated public sympathy for the Cubans amongst the U.S. population. In fact, William Randolph Hearst cabled his correspondents in Cuba to, "You furnish the pictures, I'll furnish the war." What that was kind of saying was, if they could just come up with some sort of visual that could be published, Hearst could come up with the story himself. And so all of this yellow press eventually kind of creates a groundswell in the U.S. to try to take a more active role in kind of bringing about a peaceful resolution. But another event that kind of escalates tensions a little bit becomes known as the Delome scandal. Delome was a Spanish diplomat to the United States, and in a letter that was leaked to the press, he portrayed McKinley as kind of a corrupt and weak president, something that diplomats probably shouldn't be doing, and it kind of furthered the ill will of in the bad feelings towards the Spanish. But the event that really draws the United States into war is the explosion of the USS Maine. You see, it was sent down to Cuba in 1898 to try to protect Americans' economic interests and evacuate Americans if needed. But after its explosion in Cuba, you can kind of see there was a funeral procession here in the lower right-hand corner for those sailors that were killed on board. And as you would expect, once the yellow press got a hold of the information of this explosion, they quickly blamed it on the Spanish. They kind of said that mines were planted in the harbor, causing the USS Maine to explode and kill those sailors. But in reality, it was probably internal combustion or something on board that ignited and blew up, causing the blast. But you can see, obviously, that the message being sent, which the public believed, caused Congress eventually to declare war. And whereas we had, remember the Alamo before, now we had shouts of, remember the Maine. But even before war was declared, Assistant Secretary of the Navy Teddy Roosevelt cabled Admiral Dewey and gave him instructions to leave Hong Kong and set sail for the Philippines. And by May of 1898, after war had been declared, the 6 U.S. warships sailed into Manila Bay and destroyed all 10 of the Spanish warships, killing over 400 Spanish with only the loss of one U.S. sailor. Now, eventually, we also storm ashore, and with the assistance of Emilio Aguinaldo, the Filipino insurgents kind of aided the U.S. Against the Spanish forces on land. And so, with their help, we're able to defeat the Spanish on land as well. And here is Teddy Roosevelt, who, after having cabled Admiral Dewey, actually gave up his assignment as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy so that he could actually lead forces down in Cuba. And the group that he leads becomes known as the Rough Riders. However, you see the U.S. Army overall at the beginning of the war, although it had soldiers that had experience putting down Indian uprisings, was rather small and weak and really ill prepared to try to take on, go fight in this war. We still find that African Americans were, fighting in segregated units and faced discrimination. But with all that, this group of Rough Riders, however, did find success. In fact, Teddy Roosevelt leads them up San Juan Hill to capture the Spanish and defeat them. We also see that just like the American success with its navy in the Philippines, they also have great success here in Cuba. Once again, the Spanish fleet here was completely destroyed. This time, costing the lives of over 500 Spanish sailors to only one, once again, for the U.S. And in reality, for the United States, even though 379 American servicemen do die in battle, it's really disease that takes a bigger toll, as over 5,000 succumb to sickness and disease. And as the splendid little war comes to a conclusion, we see that the U.S. really does, kind of start to claim an empire. As once Spain is defeated, we are given Puerto Rico and Guam, and we also buy the Philippines from the Spanish for $20 million. However, we don't give the Philippines their independence, as we're kind of fearful that Germany might try to seize it. Plus, having the Philippines and Hawaii kind of proved valuable in creating closer relations and more trade with Asia. But really, once the war is done, the big decision that we were faced with was, what should we do with the Philippines? Should we fight for their freedom just to keep it from them? Or should we grant them their freedom? This and other issues, however, we'll take a look at in our next episode.